So what's a black Beatle anyways? Last year, Rae Sremmurd had a huge hit single called Black Beatles, which is just this very young hip hop duo who were, rapping about being Black Beatles, though most of the song's just a party anthem. And I had watched a hilarious video by Todd in the Shadows where he was breaking down the song as he does with all the number one hits that come out that he has something to say about. And he was kind of ragging on the song for not really having much to do with the Beatles and asking, like, why even call this song Black Beatles? Now, personally, I had heard the lyric Black Beatles a few times before, and it got me curious about, like, why is this coming up? What is this musical motif? What is it sort of doing there? In my research, I found that the first usage of the term Black Beatles known in rap music was from a Public Enemy song called What You Need Is Jesus. But the first lyric that most people know it from is, of course, the Kanye West lyric from the song Gorgeous. What's a Black Beatle anyways? A fucking roach? Must be why they got me sitting in fucking coach. I also know this lyric from the Kendrick Lamar's Bitch Don't Kill My Vibe remix with Jay-Z on it, where at the end he sings, if Sean's a Black Beatle, then I need a 10-second drum solo, bitch, see you at Woodstock. In reference to, I guess, a 10-second drum solo in a Beatles song, and Sean being Jay-Z's real name. It's basically saying we are two of the Black Beatles. If Jay-Z is a Black Beatle, I too am a Black Beatle. So what is this obsession with the idea of Black Beatles? Now, as you probably know, the Beatles are probably the most well-respected musical act of all time. They come up in every list of the greatest artists, the greatest albums. They're always, considered to be, the greatest rock band ever. But there's something weird about that, and there's been kind of a backlash about it in certain musical discussion forums and areas, because of the fact that there's not really a clear reason that they should be the most respected group. They are one of the highest selling groups of all time, but not necessarily the highest, nor the one that, or the most consistently selling. Like Michael Jackson, I believe, outsells the Beatles. Why is he not considered the greatest artist of all time? Well, they have a more consistent music catalog. I mean, in fairness, they have a good handful of albums that are considered classics, but I don't think any of their albums is not contentious. Like, all of them have people who love them or hate them. Michael Jackson's discography might not be as respected among music critics, certainly is among the populace. I'd say he has as many fans. But, the point being, ultimately, were they pioneers of a sound? Not really. Their sound is kind of cobbled together from other sounds. They sort of based a lot of their sound on, the kind of shit that they had practiced when they spent 10 years playing in a club, playing all these different genres of music. So if they weren't really pioneers of, if they weren't the first to do rock and roll, if they weren't the best to do rock and roll by everyone's standards, and if they weren't the highest selling to do rock and roll, why are they considered the most classic band? And I think it's kind of just a weird, cultural artifact where it's they are because they are. Because people have kept saying so for so fucking long. Rolling Stone magazine will always put their albums as one of the best albums of all time, or fill up the top 5 with Beatles albums, or Bob Dylan, alternately. But Bob Dylan, I don't think he's remained as popular with younger people as the Beatles have over the years. The Beatles still, gain new fans and shit. But, it's just, this sort of idea exists in our culture that the Beatles is the greatest band. And I understand how this could be frustrating, especially when you look at it in terms of all the most well-respected musicians sort of being white musicians, seeing the Beatles and Bob Dylan at the top of all these best of lists, when so much of musical history was began as black music. Rock and roll has its roots in African American music. There's been lots of times controversies over the idea that white bands essentially achieved success just copying black music. Led Zeppelin has always been sort of attacked for that. And I think it's just kind of weird that, like, I don't even think the Beatles doesn't deserve the acclaim they have, but why is there not also a black artist who is as respected as the Beatles? Why is there no, like, black artist who's also listed in that top 5, Not to say that there's not any black artists who are, extremely well respected. Obviously someone like, oh god, what the fuck, Miles Davis, is widely considered one of the greatest artists who ever lived. But, why are the Beatles always number 1? And why are so many white artists at the top of the charts why isn't Michael Jackson up there? He's also an extremely well-respected, I mean, granted, Michael Jackson has maybe some political stuff, from what happened in the 90s, but all that shit's fake anyways, so there's no reason that should affect it. But, that's the way that things go in culture. So I feel like this idea of there needing to be a black Beatles, to like supplant the Beatles, to put a black artist on the top of the charts, on the top of the best of all time lists, I feel like that's kind of, in the cultural consciousness, this idea of who will be the black Beatles, who will be as respected as the Beatles in the long run. And, obviously different rappers want to paint themselves in that position. Rae Sremmurd does it as a couple of incredibly young guys, which makes it sound like sheer hubris. But when it comes out of someone like Kendrick Lamar's mouth, you stop for a second and think, well, shit. What if Kendrick Lamar is a black Beatle? What if his music lives on for the next 40 years and he's always considered a huge influential figure? Man already has the albums under his belt, the critical acclaim in the albums, And I do think there's been a big pendulum shift basically since Kanye West towards rap being more and more critically acclaimed. Like, rap has been popular since the 90s, and there have been classic rap albums, but, like, in the last few years, rap is at the top of all the best of lists. Like, it's Kendrick Lamar and Kanye West who are topping everybody's best of the year lists, these days. So maybe we are in this current rap renaissance where rap is the cultural zeitgeist, where it's the genre that's sort of the most popular, the most influential, the genre that's attracting the most attention. Like, if a black version of the Beatles were to emerge, or just a black artist who would be as respected as the Beatles, especially in rap, this might be the time that it would happen. And maybe that's why it's on everybody's minds, Can Kanye be a black Beatle? I don't know. I don't know if his public persona and the inconsistency of his albums can allow that. Can Kendrick be a black Beatle? I could see it. Jay-Z, I could see it. But, the biggest thing about the Beatles is that they've been around for as long as most of us have been alive. They were big in the fucking 60s. So, like, again, it's embedded into the cultural memory that these guys are the greatest band. But I think as fewer and fewer people care about the Beatles going forward, and more people care about rap music, and someone like Kendrick Lamar influences a new generation, and we, in retrospect, see him as a gigantically important artist, maybe the tides will change. Only time will tell.